6:15, and so sorry, I took more time than I thought. 6:30 in the morning here on the U.S. East Coast. Today's date is October 22nd. You have to forgive me. I have my phone plugged in, which is kind of a tricky thing to do when you got it perched on the steering wheel here. Another episode of Tom Unscripted, and this is going to be a heavy one, so be ready for it. Today's episode, we're going to go into the numbers of what has happened if we are dealing with a biowarfare scenario. You know, a lot of people refer to what's happened here as a Chinese biological weapon, a globalist biological weapon. You know, draw your own conclusions about what you think is true. It's the new documents and evidence coming out about the parasites, about ADE, all these other things coming along there. But what I want to share with you is, you know, if warfare is a question of removing your enemy and removing the obstacles from you, you begin to look at what the future looks like. And this is kind of like the New World Order view of how they might see a depopulation project. Now, am I saying this is happening? No, I'm not. Am I saying it's going to be this bad? No, I am not. But what I am sharing with you is what the worst case scenario looks like in terms of numbers for North America. When I say North America, I should be very clear. I've done the numbers for the United States and Canada. I haven't done them for Mexico. The reporting just wouldn't be there, and frankly, my mind isn't in that. But what I will say we're going to look at in today's program is, you know, a lot of people look and a lot of people ask, oh, what happens, what's the danger to society from the people who have not gotten fuel injected, you know, to the rest of the people, which is sort of a ridiculous question, to be honest with you, because if the actual treatments worked, you wouldn't need to ask that question. And that there's new research coming out. We've shared some of it in our Telegram group, t.me/Atlantic Homeland, talking about actually how the risk for the people who are fuel injected is growing, and not only that, but there's some evidence out there suggests they might be risk to others. But let's assume the worst case scenario in that vein, that the people who have got along and trusted the science, they've trusted Big Pharma, the globalist corporations, World Health Organizations. Remember, it's run by an Ethiopian communist, heavily funded by the Communist Party of China, and of course heavily funded by international banking, you know, people like the World Economic Forum. Let's say that they have gone ahead and this is theoretically a kill shot. If it was a kill shot, and if we saw 100% of the people who got this pass away, what would that look like? So before I get into that, let me just remind you, we do a lot of interesting shows and research on this channel. I share this a little more widely than usual because it's that important. If you like what you're seeing, join the Telegram group, t.me/Atlantic Homeland. Support the program. A super chat here works. Venmo's even better because then Google doesn't take 30%. You would go ahead and that's Venmo at CVCPRV. So this is the United States numbers, and I have, you can see, got my wife's computer here. Got a big Excel status sheet, although I didn't actually use Excel for it, but I ran the numbers based upon what was being reported by the Becker Review Group and just looking at the numbers of what we were having. So in a population of America, which the way they estimate it out, and the estimates aren't perfect, so the numbers aren't going to be 100% precise, but they're give or take 5%, these are right. The United States, as of right now, has a legal population, let's put it registered population, of 328,254, 593 people approximately. Let's just call it 330 million people. And they actually, I was using the Center for Migration Studies just because you need to know this because it's relevant to the story before it's all said and done. They estimate there are 10.3 million illegal immigrants here who are not eligible for citizenship. There's another group who are, but I think they get encapsulated in some of the other numbers as green cards. So we'll leave that aside for the moment. But here's what's interesting. Countrywide, if you believe the numbers about who has been injected, we're looking at about 56% of the United States, supposedly, according to this Becker group, has been successfully inoculated. Okay, the Becker Hospital Review. So you can look this up if you want. It's Becker Hospital Review / public health / states ranked by percentage population vaccinated. Okay, so these are the numbers there. And they've been updating this daily. It's updated as of yesterday. So these are pretty realistic numbers, okay? Supposedly by what they're claiming. Whether they're true or not, I can't tell you. But if that number is actually true, then we have 185,555,884 Americans who have received a full dosage of the injection. There are, by contrast, 142,698,709 who have not. And important to remember in those numbers is they do not include many children because this has not been approved. They're just starting to get into the 12 to 18-year-olds. They're trying, the Biden administration is desperately trying to get into the 5 to 11 range, and they're trying to move the studies forward. So of that number we're dealing with, and I can't separate out exactly what it is, it's kind of hard to figure out, but of the 142 million holdouts, let's put them that way, that most of them, or a big chunk of them, are going to be underage children. So this is really a scary number. So if, in fact, we are dealing with a bioweapon that has the potential to either permanently harm, disable, kill, whatever to people, because we know there is foreign DNA in it. We know there are mRNA instructions. We know, and we see new evidence come out each day about the presence of iron oxide available in these elements. What you need to know is that the potential for how many people we're going to lose is crazy. And just real fast before I go forward, I did the numbers on Canada too as best I could. It's a little hard, your information's a little spottier up there, but Canada theoretically has a population of 38 million people. Just a hair under 28 million have been, received treatment, and that leaves just a hair over 10 million left, overwhelmingly who are underage. So you're looking there at a overall rate within the country of 73 million people, 73.4% who have been. Ontario and Quebec, the biggest one, 73.9% in Ontario, 75.5% in Quebec, 75.5% in BC, 66% in Alberta, 72% in Manitoba, and you go down and down. Okay, so why am I telling you this? I'm just giving you hard numbers to put this in mind. How many of you have been following, and maybe if you follow alternative media, you heard of something called the Deagle Report. Basically, it's a bunch of ex-spooks putting out business intelligence. And they said that in the future, the United States would have a population of 150 million people. People are like, that's crazy. America has 350 to 400 million when you start counting how many illegals are here. And like I said, right now, as of today, let me tell you the number here. Once again, 142.7 million people U.S. who have not been, and that includes a heck of a lot of children, and 10.3 million illegals who are here. So right now, as of today, if everyone who had this treatment disappeared, we would be down in our country to about 153 million people. 10 million of it, or 6.7% of which who are here illegally, and I include all of them as survivors because they're not being required to hit those requirements of getting these doses. Presumably some of them have, so that number will probably be somewhat lower, but I don't know if it'll be a lot lower because people like that aren't going to want to get in the system. Maybe 10%, maybe 20%. I will say this, bipartisan affiliation, I was reading, 58% of Republicans have gone on board with this. It was about 80%, 78 to 80%, depending on who you looked at, of independents, 93 to 94% of Democrats. So what does this mean for the future? And I want to break this down a little more. We're talking big level here. So big level, the United States of America will now have the richest farmland in the world, and a population of 142 million, which will overwhelmingly be children stuck defending it. We are dealing with a situation where we hear, people talk about those ships and those containers off the port. You see China having that million-man army, that they have, remember the one child left behind policy. Some of you have mentioned that to me privately. It's a good point. They have a lot of men who are aged 20 to 30 years old who don't have women in their lives, So if the potential exists, if this is a bioweapon, and if it can be controlled in any way, either by ethnicity, by gender, or just simply by removing people from the equation, what happens is the United States and North America has already lost the war. And the Sinovac LS item, as best I understand it, is just a traditional thing where they don't have these impacts. They don't have the ADE because they didn't do mRNA. And the same would be true for Western Europe, for Australia, for other places. So if, in fact, the worst case scenario is true, I'm going to be the first one to tell it to you, the battle has already been lost. I mean, we might be able to fight a guerrilla war and, people might be able to offer some degree of resistance. But Grand Flash nailed it. It is a welcome mat for China. And, in fact, the loss is terrible. Let's go state by state for a second. I want you to see how bad it is in some places, because I went ahead and I did the granular numbers for you just because it's interesting. So what happens is that California, goes from a state of 39.5 million down to 15.6 million. Texas, 28.99 million down to 13.7 million. Florida, 21.47 million down to 8.8 million. And I'm not counting illegals. That runs these numbers up. New York, 19.45 million, down to 6.64 million. And you just look at these numbers over and over again. And I mean, just to give you an example, if I'm right, if this theory is right, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 states now that will be under 1 million people. And most of those, like I said, are going to be underage. They're going to be people. And they're going after them too. They're going after them through the schools. They're rushing to get them before the breakdown. So if this is in fact a bioweapon and it is controllable, I want to warn you, we are in desperate times. Now, do I know the numbers by count? No. And I will say to you, I had sorted this. Let me sort it again because I will tell you which places, give me 1 second here. I want to make sure I have this right here. Which places have it's interesting, the places whose population grows, the population then begins to shift, it begins to shift downward, right? So the largest states now are and I'll just read them quickly in order. The top 10 now become California, Texas, Florida, New York, Illinois, Ohio, Georgia, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Michigan. But what you really start to see the move is in the center areas, like states. Here are the states that are under 50%, just so you know who are going to be the least impacted by this. Wyoming, North Dakota, Montana, Idaho, West Virginia, Arkansas, Mississippi, Oklahoma, Louisiana, South Carolina, Alabama, Missouri, Indiana, Tennessee, Georgia, and you see them moving up the line. And the worst states are overwhelmingly in the Northeast. Then the Pacific Coast is next. And what you begin to see is the southern border of the United States. If you look at this from a biowarfare perspective, you look and see there's a whole bunch of illegals coming in there, and that you're seeing quite a bit of loss in population in those states here. We'll just look real fast at the number of people. You're looking at a population reduction theoretically in California of 24 million, of Texas of 15 million, Arizona 3.8 million, and New Mexico. Where's New Mexico? They're further down because they're a smaller state. Give me 1 second here. Let me see if I can find them. I can't see the NM. My eyes are a little blind this morning, so bear with me. Apologize for that. There we are, 1.3 million. And keep in mind that these are states that, and this is from the Center for Migration Studies, these numbers may get higher going forward. We're talking about 53,000 illegals in New Mexico. And we don't know why these people are here. I mean, maybe it's something okay, maybe it's not. 258,000 in Arizona, 1.78 million in Texas, and 2.25 in California. I suspect that's numbers are very challenging. So where are we and where are the problems? So as we look at this map, well, the other thing we see is that the states that are along the northern border with Canada, as well as the Canadians themselves, are going to be decimated. I mean, just the percentages who got this. In Vermont, 70%. Let's see who else is on the border here. Maine, 69.8%. North Dakota did well, 45.5%. New Hampshire's got a border, 52%. Montana, 49.8%. Remember, these are not big states. All these states are basically under 1 million people, with the exception of a couple Midwestern states. Idaho's only at 43%, very small border there, though. Just to give you some other examples of big areas, Washington's at 63%. What else do we got here to look at? Michigan was about 53%. So a lot of losses up there. And of course, those are thinly populated areas anyways, but America will be indefensible from two different angles. So keep that in mind. And the people who are in the military who are being drummed out now, if in fact these other people could be shut off, it may very well happen that the whole thing could be shut down. It's just the way it is. And Christy, I hear what you're saying, because she writes that no one pays attention to your town anymore. And that may very well be true. And God bless your town and your place if that's the truth. But what I'm telling you is, while your town may be okay, and while I recommend everyone finds towns like where Christy's living, what I'm telling you is if these numbers are actually representative of, the numbers are the numbers actually, but if the plan involves the removal of people who've gone on board with this. What I'm telling you is the country itself is no longer viable. Every urban area will probably be done. The key infrastructure will not be able to survive. The people who could keep it afloat have already been purged from it, and the people who will be in charge of it as of this November or December, the only people who will be left in key infrastructure will be ones who will succumb to this. So at the same time that all these things happen, the breakdowns will begin. And I do recommend getting to small towns, getting to places where people can stand in support of one another in rural areas that are going to be away from things. Now, I will say this. Just he makes a good point, and I saw Grand Flash talking about this too, that the problem is the cluster, as you would expect, is in the Mountain West and the Southeast. Where people are not getting this. Although you'd be disappointed, I think. Like, you look at some of these states, Virginia's at 62%, Florida's at 59%. I mean, the numbers are not great down there either. And to be honest with you, Georgia, 47%. These are still huge losses. And you could say, well, it's addition through subtraction. Some of the people who will be gone, and maybe that's true and maybe that isn't. But what I wanted to say to you as I look at this is it strikes me that what's going to happen is before the government, if our government is in fact hostile to us or controlled by some globalist faction, homage to the Chinese, part of some new world order plan, what they will try to do is they will go ahead and they will try to do some sort of damage to the Southeast. Maybe you have a tsunami hit, wipe Florida off the map. All you got gets to 300 feet, and you can do that. You can crush the coast of Texas, all those refineries gone in Houston, and all of a sudden Texas isn't nearly as viable in terms of, being a world economic power as it would be. And it's interesting, you watch people like Elon Musk and people like that, yeah, they're building in Texas, but they're building upland, west of Dallas in that way. And then you look at the problems, too, with the demography in Texas, how Austin's changed, San Antonio, all of these places. We could pick Atlanta, Tampa, whatever you like. The bottom line is this, and I'm not saying anything against the Southeast, by the way. They have better odds at this point than anyone else in terms of just the raw demography. So there's no question of that. Numbers say what numbers say. But what I want you to understand is if that in fact happens, what will probably happen is that you will see that the areas, and I will say this from an externality perspective, what the infrastructure they're going to want to grab is not in the Southeast. The Southeast does have the ability to produce some food. It does have some energy resources. But by and large, the real value to an external power looking at this will be the farmland to the upper Midwest, where it's low population density and the cities are going to be gone. It'll be the financial centers in the Northeast, which they may choose to occupy for administrative reasons, as well as the West Coast and the California inland valleys. Now, people will be able to offer resistance, I imagine, in the mountainous areas of Appalachia and the Rockies, and that is where I've thought the best bet is for a while. I think you might be dealing with a Red Dawn scenario in the Midwest if these numbers lead to the worst of all possible outcomes. Now, do we know any of this is true? No. We don't know that, but I will say that that's a problem. Now, let me go to Canada for 1 second because I just want to give you guys a feel for what I'm looking at. The only places, everywhere in Canada is over 70%, with the exception of the prairie provinces, which are in the high 60s. I mean, we're in the high 70s out here in the Maritimes. Prince Edward Island's at 95%. That's crazy. All that's going to be left is the Anne of Green Gables house, which is a beautiful house, by the way. I've been. And Quebec's numbers, 75%. I mean, it's going to be an empty country. It's going to be an empty continent if it comes to that. And same with Western Europe. So if the plan for the New World Order to have the social reset is that to remove people from the way, right? This will be probably quite successful. Now, whether or not that's going to happen, I don't know. I can imagine scenarios where there's some sort of control. I mean, why put synthetic grafting in if you're not going to use that? These could be people turned against you. And let's take that scenario just for a second, because we're just imagining, not saying any of this is happening, don't have any evidence other than telling you that weird things are out there. Then you're going to be dealing with, these are going to be the areas they're going to be attacking, where pretty much every state will have over 50%. Most states will have 60 to 70%, especially in the industrialized Northeast. And they will have external help to prosecute a war with robotics against people who are existing separately in the heartland in certain areas. And I will tell you, you're going to need to be ready for those potential outcomes. You're also going to have to deal with that at the same time that supply shortages will become rampant. We already know there's problems with fuel shortages. There will be problems with food. And the minute any of this becomes a real problem, it's going to be a real disaster. So I wanted you to see those numbers, and I wanted to scare you a little bit more. So that number number of 142 million I gave you for the United States. If in fact let's say the administration, they're averaging probably, let's say somewhere between 50 and 70%. They're trying to get in the next 2 months another 28 million kids age 5 to 11. That's the next cohort they're working on. Let's say that they get 15 million of them. We'll say a little over 50%. Maybe people are wising up. I doubt it, because kids will probably be agreeing to things and the parents won't even know. But let's just pretend then that number of what's left in the United States is going to trip down into the 120 million, 130 million range. That's what's left, including a whole bunch of toddlers, kids under the age of 11, and a small group, probably, God, I'm doing the math, between, depending on what numbers you believe, somewhere between 50 and 100 million Americans left, primarily in rural areas, more Republican than not, but not exclusively, living, trying to exist outside of this with a government that's hostile and actively persecuting them. This is a problem that you're going to have. Will the people fight if something bad happens? Yeah, sure they will, but they'll be fighting against their own government. The military resources of this country will be employed against them, and you'll have externalities, probably in a UN situation. And they may call it a humanitarian disaster. And remember, there's going to be a lot of problem with, people going along and supporting whoever has an answer for this. It's absolutely going to be a big problem. Corporate media is a disaster. I agree. People shouldn't listen to it. And, I can't explain why. Actually, yeah, I can explain why people on the left and people in the Northeast are, because they're overeducated to a collectivism against their interests. They're not dumb people. They're listening to the wrong people. That's what it is. It's more heart and less brain, and there needed to be more brain, and the loss of faith. I mean, the Northeast used to have good churches. I won't get into it. It's a different topic for a different show, but it's all fallen apart in this humanist gobbledygook, and it's a 200-year story. I've talked about on this channel, starting with the Unitarians. We don't need to get into it today, because it's a problem that you're going to have everywhere. But the problem, I just want to put into relief for today's show, so that you knew how bad the problem is likely to be, and how bad it's going to be in your area. For my friends in the Northeast, like I'm looking at the state of Maine just as an example. Maine, if I'm right, Maine will go from a state of 1.34 million people to a state of 405,000. The city of Portland will become an afterthought, and we'll be living here onesies and twosies. And you can look, the New York Times actually has a pretty helpful database if you want to look, and you look by county. I think it's a pretty interesting way to be aware of what's going on. Look, I'll just give you an example for my home state of Maine, okay? Let's pick Piscataquis County, Maine, where Greenville is, where you guys send the mail to. Right now, the percentage who are fully injected, okay? Of people who are over the age of 65, 80%. Of people over the age of 18, 64%. Of all residents, 56%. So this is what I'm telling you. It's that number gap, of what's out there. But if I were to pick, let's see if I can get down to the coast here. We'll see if I can get to Cumberland County, Maine. That's down near Portland. You're looking at 77% who've gone on board with it, of all residents, and of people who are over the age of 12, 87%. So Portland's gone at that point. And you can pick whatever state you want, and look at these numbers. Like we'll pick, I know we got a Missourian in here, so let's take a quick look here, just to give you a feel for a totally different place. We'll look at Jefferson County, Missouri, which is, St. Louis County, Missouri. We'll look where your big city is. 56% of your residents are fully there, 65% of those over age 12. So now when you get into the rural areas of Missouri, it looks like the numbers are running around 20 to 30%, which is much healthier in those other areas. And that's some of the better places. Same as throughout the rural Southland. Like in the rural Northeast, you're still looking, Pennsylvania is looking like 40 to 50%. And up here in New England, for better or worse, the numbers are in the high 50s and low 60s, even in the rural areas, because people kind of go along to get along. I mean, the problem here is, in the Northeast, is that people are too, things aren't bad enough where I live for people to have the sort of suspicion they need to have. But when you look at the numbers and you look county by county, I wish I could get this brought up for you. If you go to nytimes.com/interactive/2020/US COVID vaccine doses, I think if you just type in New York Times COVID-19 doses map, you can see this for your county, and it will give you a feel for the map. And basically, the darker the map is, the more screwed you are. And so when you look at the map as a whole, maybe I can put it in front of you so you can see. Let me see. You might not be able to see well, but we'll try for the purposes of conversation. You can see that as you look at the map here, bad problems on the coast. If the New World Order's intention is to take down the United States of America, okay? The map, yeah, right? If the New World Order's intention is to take down America, the borders are already porous. The people who are going to be there can be removed at a moment's notice. Key infrastructure can be taken down in terms of the personnel, not the items. And this is important because they want to retain the infrastructure. Keep that in mind, as crumbly as it is. The cities will be gone of people, and all that will be left is people in rural areas trying to endure and survive. That's the future that we might be facing. And to be honest with you, I think there's a decent chance it could happen in a heartbeat. All you would need to do is release a new bioweapon that was calibrated to take advantage of the ADE effects that already exist. And that it hasn't happened is because there is more time, I think, to try to get more people damaged so that this is easier. You know, the easiest way to win a war is without a fight. And the people surrendered when they gave up their sovereignty as human individuals, their bodies, without questioning what this is. I didn't even run the numbers for Europe. If you look at the demography there, I mean, it would be interesting. I'm not going to do it because I don't have the time to, but I would say this for my European friends, for my Australian friends. You know, look at your own country, look at your individual states, provinces, look at the numbers and the risk you're running. If you're in Moderna, AstraZeneca, Johnson, Janssen, whatever you call it over there, any of these ones here, it's not good. And a Pfizer, it looks real bad. And if the end game that they want is to turn people, remove people, if they actually have the ability to do that, and I don't know that they do. I honestly don't know. But if that's the game that they're going to play, the country's already lost. And so people who keep looking, oh, we're going to vote in a solution, we're going to talk, you're wasting your time. They already have their hook in these people. They can't help it. And even if you think nothing more than it has a effect, okay? We don't have to know if it's programmable. We could just think it's as simple as the fact that, and with the right spread, something highly transmissible that will be deadly. And when you look at the function research, the HIV base, you go way back into the 80s of the people who were at any age involved with this. And the reason they're letting this all fall through is how the New World Order can give you the South. Sort of ironic because they've been trying to do future in this time of from the catastrophes that we see all.